right. Tonight we are here and welcoming you to the second episode of ISIP ISAK for the year 2023. We're coming in with fresh topics and speaking to current context with old and new friends who will join us here at ISIP ISAK. I am Zara and I will be facilitating our conversation tonight. It is the second day of February and two special days come to mind. Valentine's Day and the anniversary of the People Power Revolution. It seems fitting to remember on Love Month the bloodless revolution that happened on EDSA 37 years ago and the events that led up to that. So if you are watching now and have not yet shared the link to tonight's conversation with your family and friends, forward yun na. Take this opportunity to encourage the people around you to learn and hear about stories from just a few decades ago that have impacted our lives today. And if this is your first time tuning into ISIP ISAK, these conversations on faith and society are brought to you by the Institute for Studies in Asian Church and Culture, or ISAK. ISAK's history parallels that of the country. ISAK was born in 1978 in response to the experience of authoritarian rule, and for more than 4 decades it has been part of significant movements that have shaped and continue to influence church and public life. As ISAK sees the need for strong civic morality and a vigilant citizenry that will support their democratic institutions, we are hoping to insert biblical perspectives into conversations that affect issues in the public square. And we want to do this using traditional media and now social media. And so this is part of our work in advocacy and popular education for good governance. If you want to know more about ISAK and what we do, visit our website, isac.global. That is ISACC.GLOBAL, or visit our Facebook page, Institute for Studies in Asian Church and Culture. All right, so let's have a look at our comments for tonight. Do we have any shout outs from our viewers? Do we see anyone familiar? Okay, we have somebody sending their regrets. I hope that you have a good dinner, Norma, and we look forward to hearing from our viewers. If you have perhaps any comments or questions you would like to ask our panelists later, you could type them out on our Facebook page, and we would try to answer these questions or comments, and if not, then we try to get back to you at a later date. All right, so let's start this evening. The title of tonight's show is Martial Law Through the Eyes of a Child. So martial law, or yung batas militar, this involves a temporary substitution of military authority for civilian rule. So the Philippines was placed under martial law on September 23, 1972 by then President Ferdinand E. Marcos. Mr. Marcos ruled for a total of 20 years until he was ousted after sustained civil resistance that culminated in the People Power Revolution in February 1986. And that is what we are looking forward to celebrating this February. Now, in 2022, the son and namesake of Mr. Marcos was elected president of our republic. And so this is the context we find ourselves in today. Tonight, we revisit recent history and pass on firsthand stories from our friends who lived through martial law. With us tonight are 3 friends of ISAK whose childhood and youth played out during the martial law years and the years immediately after that. Tonight, we welcome Ms. Eva Marie Famador. She is currently serving as the National Coordinator of MICA Philippines, a network of churches, Christian development organizations, and individuals promoting integral mission. She teaches biblical leadership at the Learning Tree Child Growth Center and does consultancy projects on children and youth issues. Hello, Ate Joy.
Hello, good evening to our watchers and listeners. Thank you very much for Isaac for inviting me to share my own story about martial law.
We we are very happy to have you, Ate Joy. Next up, we have Sandra Roldan. She is an assistant professor for creative writing at UP Diliman. She is a PhD candidate at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, where she is doing creative practice research with her dissertation topic on storytelling as embodied creative practice and acts of resistance. I love that. And has written short stories and a children's book on martial law. Good to have you tonight, Sandra.
Hi, good evening to everyone. Thank you for having us. It's always a good time to talk about martial law because it is both past and present for everyone here.
I love that. I can't wait to unpack that with you. Finally, tonight we have Daniel Agoncillo, who is a resident writer at ISAK. He has taught history, done research among the farmers of Nueva Ecija, and organized the urban poor in Mandaluyong. He has spent nearly 17 years working as an editor for various newspapers and currently contributes to Rappler. Hello, Kuya Danny.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for having us tonight. We'll be more than happy to share our stories with our audience about martial.
Thank you. And thank you all for making time to gather tonight and to engage in a little exchange of stories and experiences. Personally, I was 2 years old when the EDSA revolution happened, and I could not say I experienced any um, any effect at that time, no, when I was younger, of what had happened during the martial law years. For some reason, it seems as if being raised in Dumaguete at the time, there was an insulation of sorts that happened. But as I grew older and started reading, it began to dawn on me that these things needed to be read and needed to be told so that we would remember things that had happened just a few decades ago. And so, thank you all so much for your time. We are very grateful for the opportunity to hear your stories and use this platform to share these with others. So, we have some questions prepared to guide our conversation tonight, and I will ask these questions one by one, starting with Ate Joy. Ate Joy, how old were you when martial law was declared in 1972?
I was 12 years old at the time, first year high school. So the first time that we heard about martial law, I never really understood it, no? Our teacher would say, martial law is when imagine yourself somebody going, a military go or a police going into your house without your permission, and you will be just pulled out from your own home. So still, that did not really grab me at the time. But of course, what was the life like when you are a child? You see more experience, no? One is the declaration of curfew. So you go home early. There is this quietness at night. And then the martial law regime at that time really used music. So the introduction of bagong, what's this? The New Society. No? There was this song, a marching song. So it's just like changing the mindset of the people of how a martial law could look like at that time. So we were asked to sing that. And aside from that, there were some experiences of, to have military checkpoints. Once you cross a certain town, there's a military checkpoint. So all these things, gradual, before we think of policemen as somebody respectable,
Mhm.
that if there's a crime that's happening in your neighborhood, you go to the police. But at that time, it has changed the image. It's more of you, the child, being afraid
Wow.
of a military personnel, no, or a police person. Of course, that further deepened the understanding of martial law. Further deepened when I turned to college. I was in UP. I was taking political science, and that was the time. Of course, there was no social media. So you will get to have some, you're going to receive some handouts, bibliograph, 1/4 sheet of paper, and then it would tell about some um, ostentatious life of the First Lady. You know, it came from Africa with carrying the tusks of the elephant, which was illegal at the time. So
Mhm.
there were a lot of stories, but it goes through the informal channel because
Mhm.
the press was muzzled, no? So, of course, rallies were there. Kapit bisig, the young generation today experience more of a joyful, like a feast during rallies. But at that time, no, kapit bisig kami. Somebody might disappear along the rank, no? So
Right.
I joined some rallies, and of course, the use of arts. Aside from music, the use of arts, the administration wanted to, of course, they would say we have the CCP, Cultural Center of the Philippines, but there was this alternative art, which is the theater, bringing stories to the grassroots. So I've seen
Wow.
that. Yeah. So during rallies there, you will find, of course, movies. There were also some movies that will talk about the social ills of the society. No, so
Right.
those were the things. It's really using or trying to institute change through the use of the arts.
Right.
No,
So it sounds like there was an easing in at that time if we're still talking about relative peace, and then little by little you hear, you know, these songs and some messages spread through art. Do you think that was to get people to buy into the idea of the reason behind martial law?
it's a way of using art was a way of veering the attention of the people from
Mm.
what is negative about martial
Ah,
law. No,
I
but the
see.
truth has to come out. The truth has to
I
come out
see.
one way or the other, informal or not. So, toward the tail end of martial law, I was already taking up my master's in public administration. So, my classmates were civil servants. Okay? So, they come, civil servants working in government, judge, lawyer, different positions in government. And there, again, you will find stories
Mm, okay.
stories how the president or the first lady implement something which is not covered in media. It was never covered in media,
Right.
so you get to hear a lot of stories there.
All
Yeah.
right. Thank you. Thank you for that. How about you, Sandra? Ate Sandra, do you remember? I guess I'd like to ask if maybe if you weren't born yet, then the years wherein you experienced martial law, what was life like at that moment?
Um, let's see. So I was born in 1976, so that was like 4 years after martial law was declared. Um, I was actually conceived by my parents uh, in jail. My father was a political prisoner at Camp Crame, and my mother visited him. And I was conceived. I was born 9 months later. Um, when I was growing up, it was a strange experience in the sense that because my father was politically active from the 1970s up until the late 1980s. In a way, I was um, raised not just by my parents, but also by my extended family, my grandparents. And so much of my memories of martial law involve my extended family. Although I don't remember the declaration of martial law, I do um, get, I do have a strong knowledge of what it was like because I lived through it, but also because um, I was told all of these stories of what my family went through when, for example, my father was arrested for the first and second time, and how the military ransacked the house of my grandparents looking for subversive materials and guns. And how the only thing that kept them from totally destroying the house was my grandmother's aviary, because she had an entire aviary of lovebirds, and because the soldiers were um, distracted by the lovebirds, then they stopped ransacking the house. So things like that, no. Um, my earliest memories of martial law, I suppose, would be like, as I said, second hand. Um,
Mhm.
when martial law was declared, my grandfather, who worked directly under Don Chino Roses of the Manila Times, he lost his job along with everyone else in the media. And as human resources manager of the Manila Times, his job was to prepare a severance package so that everyone in the company could survive the difficulties of martial law. No? But what happened to our extended family was that with my grandfather losing his job, it was huge economic deprivation for everyone. They had just built a new house, so that the whole family was in debt. And so their standard of living really went down. For many years, it felt like there was not enough food for my uncles and aunts who were still growing teenagers at that time. I heard stories, for example, of one Christmas when the only way that they could celebrate Noche Buena, make it different from a normal dinner, was because a friend of my grandfather gave him a bag of apples, which at that time was very expensive. Remember, this was before the import liberalization of the 1990s. Apples during martial law were very, very expensive. No, so for Noche Buena that year, my family, my extended family, um, eight of eight siblings, my father and his siblings, and then everyone else in the household, naghati-hati sila dun sa bag of apples na yon, and that was their Noche Buena. So my personal memories, for example, would include growing up in my grandparents' big house, but I would remember that everything was broken. The paint,
Mm.
the paint was peeling, the wiring was damaged, the plumbing was always leaking, you know. So there was just not enough money to renovate the house. There was not enough money to keep it running smoothly. So it seems like a very common experience, because I I heard from many of my friends, people my age, basically do remember things like that. No, there's for example, very few would have like proper plumbing in the bathroom. It was always debujos, because at that time MWSS was not very efficient and water pressure was very low. It would take many years for you, if you were lucky, to get a phone line. The only phone company at that time was PLDT. And if you had connections, then you would get a phone line maybe after a year or two, right? But if you had no connections, then like my own nuclear family, for example, my grandparents, they had a phone line, but my dad, we were able to get a phone line after EDSA only when Bayantel came out. So we never got a phone line from PLDT. So things like that, no? Parang social services were actually could not be relied on, no? But the interesting thing also is that even if my father was an activist and also a political prisoner for several times during martial law, towards the end of the 1970s, he ended up becoming one of Marcos's ghostwriters. So that's the interesting thing also about my family background.
Wow.
He became a ghostwriter of Marcos because since publishing and the press were under the control of the government, many journalists and literary writers had no means to feed their family. So many of them had no
Mm,
choice but to actually work for the government, to actually write for the government. No? So there's actually a not a secret office, but there's an office called the President's Center for Special Studies during Marcos's time. And these people, the people who worked there, were all award-winning poets, playwrights, and writers because they had no other way to earn a living as writers. So
wow.
they were all the ghost writers of Marcos, and their boss was Adrian Cristobal, who was himself um, a recognized writer. So in a way, Adrian Cristobal was kind of protecting the interests and the livelihood of writers. Diba? So parang komplikado yung history natin. Sometimes walang choice yung activists kundi
Yeah,
mag-work for the government because that was the only source of income. And so
right.
because my father was one of Marcos's ghostwriters, I also grew up in government housing. I grew up in Pag-asa Bliss. Diba? We know of the Bliss housing projects as a special project of Imelda Marcos. So because my father was one of Marcos's special ghostwriters, we were given um, or we were able to avail of uh, premium government housing from the NHA at that time.
Wow.
So it's an interesting personal history in that sense. No.
Right. And it seems like it's not as clear as black and white,
Yeah.
that you're against government and you have nothing to do with it. It seems like it's very much intertwined because
Yeah.
to some extent you have no choice too. Um,
Yes.
yeah. Wow, thank you. How about you, Kuya Danny? How old were you when martial law was declared, and how was life like for you at that time?
Ano ako, 12 years old ako, going on 13. Tapos, uh, nasa freshman high school rin ako. At pinasok ako ng parents ko sa San Sebastian College High School. Galing ako UP Elementary School, nung meron pang UP Elementary School. At nung nandun ako, nakita ko yung Diliman Commune, yung barikada ng mga estudyante laban sa military. At yung mga protesta, napapanood ko sa TV ng mga estudyante. So, alam ko may political tension. Kahit sa bahay, nararamdaman ko kasi yung tatay ko, editor-in-chief siya ng publication ng koleyong kung saan siya nag-aaral. Ano siya, uh, he was a working student. Tinatapos niya yung commerce degree niya sa Technological Institute of the Philippines. Editor-in-chief siya doon. At nagsusulat siya ng mga articles na critical sa government ng panahon na yan. And nung dineklara martial law, yung umaga na yun, totally tahimik yung kapaligiran sa labas. Ano? Walang ingay, wala. Nung lumapit tatay ko sa akin, sabi niya, mukhang nag-declare na ng martial law. So, within hours, na-confirm namin yan. Lumabas si Marco sa TV at pinaliwanag niya kung bakit siya nag-declare ng martial law. Ngayon, kinausap ako ng tatay ko. Sabi niya sa akin, alam mo, hindi ko siya gusto. Pero, kasi magulo tayo ngayon eh. Hindi masyadong magulo eh. Kaya siguro itong ginagawa niyang itong martial law, makakabuti sa atin. So, yun yung position niya at the time. So, although critical siya of the Marcos government and presidency kasi nakikita yung corruption even then early on.
Mm,
And in school, they declared the martial law. Finally, pumasok kami after siguro a week of no classes. We were allowed to go back to school. Sa English saka Filipino subjects namin, yung teacher, ang pinapagawa lang sa amin, pinapagsulat kami ng composition tungkol sa benepisyo ng martial law. So, kahit hindi pa halos nagsisimula ng martial law, pinapasulat na kami sa benefits. Ano ito?
Wow.
Order, clean streets, disciplined citizens, ano pa ba? No crime. Yan yung mga So, pinapasulat kami ng ganon. Tapos, nagpapalabas sila. Kung minsan binibigyan kami ng break, tinitipon kami sa library, magpapalabas sila ng mga animated na cartoons about yung nangyayari sa Vietnam at sa China na kinapakita yung evils of communism. Yan. Tapos one day, isang araw, bumisita sa amin si Colonel Alexander Villalon ng Youth Action Development Organization. Ano itong YADO? YADO is an organization that was created apparently may military elements ito. And they had links directly to the office of the president. And base na sa kwento ni Colonel Villalon, ang duty nila is infiltrate yung mga student organizations na aktivista noon. In fact, naging KM member siya. At kwento niya na, kasi merong rally na nangyari kung saan yung mga aktivista to, may kinomandir silang truck, ibinangga sa gate ng Malacanang. Tapos para makapasok yung mga aktivista. Napilitan si Marcos na kausapin sila. Ang kwento niya, siya yung nag-drive nung truck na yun. So he had infiltrated KM. So kinikwento niya na ako naman hindi ko masyado naiintindihan yan. Na-amuse lang ako.
How old were you at this time when you met him? How old were you?
I was 12 going on 13. And,
wow.
And he was long hair siya, may malaking medalyon, naka-sunglasses siya, tapos naka-military coat. Pinikwento niya, niyayabang niya kung paano niya naka-infiltrate, paano niya na-point kung sino-sino yung mga aktivista. Yung pinikwento niya, ako naman, talaga, okay. Of course, I didn't understand much of it,
Wow.
Pero naalala ko yan. It would come in later when I finally understood what this was all about. Much later. What was it like? Nung estudyante ako, I became eventually editor-in-chief ng publication namin ng 4th year high school. Tapos may isang issue na dahil sa nilabas namin, muntik na kaming hindi mag-graduate. Yan. Pero nakagraduate din kami. We were able to defend ourselves. We were put on trial, but we were able to defend ourselves. We put out something na critical sa eskwelahan na hindi nagustuhan ng administration. So, muntik na kaming patalsikin sa eskwela yung staff namin. Pero we were coached by a lawyer, so na-depensa namin. Kwento sa amin ng publisher namin, yung teacher publisher namin. In-invite daw siya ng printer ng publication to lunch. Kasi may isa kaming article na nandun na may konti lang pitik sa gobyerno. May konti I don't even remember what it was. It was so insignificant, but the printer told him, pare, pwede ba bantayan mo yung nilalabas nyo? Kasi ganito, yung
wow.
mabubuhayan ko, ipapasara ng gobyerno. Kaya maglabas kahit na masama sa gobyerno. So kahit yung high school publications, binabantayan mabuti.
Kuya Danny, private school po ba itong San Sebastian?
It's a private school. It's San Sebastian College High School. It's a private school. Kilala yan kasi yung mga basketball team niya nagcha-champion at nagiging PBA player. I don't know if you remember Bong Alvarez, Eugene Kilban, mga doon kilala ang basket. Tapos may law school siya. So maraming
yeah.
Yeah.
Yun ba yung malapit sa Mendiola?
Yeah. Malapit sa
okay.
It's right before the bridge, andun siya.
Right. Wow, okay. Oh, that's so interesting. From 12 to 13 years old to eventually being your attention being called for a piece that you wrote in the school newspaper. That's fascinating how they paid attention to even the schools, even high schools. All right, so from there we go now to the reaction, because we talked about what it was like, how old you were at that time. What was your family's reaction, if you remember, or was there any other change that you noticed at home apart from the curfews that you mentioned, and maybe the economic repercussions? Did people begin to feel afraid? I'm not sure if that's even the right question, but what were the changes or the initial reactions that you saw after the declaration and in the months that followed? I'll go to you ulit, Ate Joy, and maybe you can tell us also a little bit of your family. What did your dad do? Did your family get affected?
So my father works in government. He was
Mm.
the provincial attorney at that time, no? And even my mother also worked in government. I have my relatives working in government as a judge. Okay, so that's a very interesting dynamic because I have an auntie who is a nun. So basically very andun sa no activism. We have family members or within the clan who are anti-Marcos. So my father, in terms
Mm.
of personality, is a quiet person. I know that he was very guarded when martial law came, but I think for those in my family who were in government, they just do what they need to do. It's their job. They do. They make most of what it means to be a professional. You try to excel in your job. But of course, the on the other side, during our reunion, there's the anti-government who will say, mga gobyerno, ganito, very vocal.
Mm.
So, in a small town, you know, from the perspective of politics, usually, it's really clannish, no, ang politics. So, head of the clan will say, we will vote for this, and then the rest of the members. But not in our family. So, in a way, we're a laughing stock because in that sense, we were not divided. We don't have the same perspective, no. But of course, the position of the eldest in the clan would say, these are people who are educated, they are independent minded, and we let it be. So I have seen guarded for my parents' reaction about martial law. So my father does not talk much, but I know that he really voted for the Liberal Party. Because
Mm.
before the declaration of martial law, the one that happened in Plaza Miranda, no, the bombing there.
Yeah.
I have seen the reaction that, of course, there was this alarm, there was this anger, but he's not very vocal about it. Just quiet, no. Um, on the other hand, you will see here the dynamics of even at the soldier level, there is the sense of entitlement, no? Like riding in a jeep.
Mm.
My aunt, who was a nun, was already sitting at the end near the, estrebo, no, the jeep, no, because it's more convenient. And then here comes the soldier. He wants to sit where she was sitting. And then, the soldier will assert that he would like to sit. And my aunt is a very courageous woman. She would say, no, I will not give in to you. And then all the passengers would say, Sister, sige na, move over. Why should I move over? So that is a very small indication of how they think that they are powerful and they exercise their power over civilians. That's an example in a very small way. So while I was already a student, I've carried that. No, my parents were afraid that when I passed UP, they knew that UP was the hotbed of dissent. They got worried I might join the rallies. Of course, when I joined the
Mm.
rallies, I never told them. No, uh, when I started to join the rallies, of course, apart to me, being a Christian, a very young Christian, I start to attend Bible study. And then because you're a political science students, you get to hear also of, the atrocities of martial law. Student leaders were picked up by military, in UP. So I asked my what's this? Bible study leader, what does Christianity say about what's happening today? And nobody can answer that. Ask the pastor. Nobody can answer that. So I had my journey. I was glad I was involved with the State Varsity Christian Fellowship. I'm just happy that there was this space of we struggled together. If it's not very much discussed in the family, at least in my family, about martial law, but we both know that something evil is happening, but it's not very vocal in terms of criticism. So in the school, that's where you find it, and I'm just happy that I think that's one of the blessing for me in the campus ministry, when there was this space for us to discuss and we struggled together. We never had final answer.
Yeah.
At that time, I think we have not really developed a mature political theology. At that time, nobody can answer. And that starts my journey.
Wow.
About justice, really, I was more, because I don't have a personal experience like Sandra had, But for me, it's about my faith. Who am I? How am I going to express my faith in a time such as this? That was a very basic question for me.
Yes.
No? So, yeah, I think justice was there as an issue. I've seen it in my parents on how, as a lawyer, how my father really handled cases, of abuse or
Right.
like grabbing, etc. So I pick up that kind of value, the concern
Okay.
for justice. Yeah.
Justice. All right. How about you, Ate Sandra? We heard about your father and your grandfather and how you felt the pinch as a family. But were there any other things that you felt from at the joy? I heard that it became palpable, this sense of entitlement and power. Was there anything like that that you remember?
Um, yes, in how do I say this? Um, our family is Ilocano, and we're also related to a very prominent political family in Ilocos Norte. I won't mention anymore what that political family is, but yeah, I do remember that whenever there would be these big clan reunions, it felt like our family was different because that family, they were all in politics, and they benefited from being in politics. No, the economic divide was very very clear between their family and our branch of the family. No, my lolo actually could have become a corrupt politician because his friends in government, who he met when he was a reporter after World War II, by the time martial law was declared, his friends were already part of Marcos's cabinet. Like um, one of my lolo's best friends became like I think the spokesperson of Marcos, and he was also a good friend of Ople, if I'm not mistaken. No, so he actually received many, many invitations from his friends who were in very high government positions to join the government, and my lolo refused because he did not want to be part of that evil. No, so it the difference was really strong for me. I could see what it was like for those who were benefiting from the dictatorship. No, like they were able to travel abroad. They had all of these like travels to Europe. They wore very flashy jewelry. I have a distinct memory of um, witnessing a raffle um, during a Christmas celebration. Syempre, hindi kami kasama sa raffle kasi hindi kami kasama dun sa political family na yun. But for some reason, they held it at my grandparents' house. Okay? So in that raffle, the prize went to a 6-year-old boy. And the prize of that raffle was the keys to a brand new car. Yeah. So ganun yung difference, no? Ganun yung difference. So
Wow.
we were not able to experience that. We saw it. So it was really bizarre, no? Parang Twilight Zone. Iba yung buhay nila, iba yung buhay namin kasi we our family chose not to be part of the corrupt government in that sense, no? We also uh, attended a church that many at that time considered radical. No, the Citadel Church was established by families in the Project 4 area, and it eventually became part of the United Church of Christ in the Philippines. And if I'm not mistaken, quite a lot of the pastors and church workers of UCCP were harassed, kidnapped, tortured by the military during martial law. And we would hear about these things um, every so often. No? So parang it was a very strange experience kasi nga I know that many Christian churches at that time chose to stay quiet, but I happened to be part of a church that was very strong on doing work with communities that were unreached by development workers, etc. And so they were the ones getting harassed by the military. No? Paano ba? Yung family setup namin, my lola was a public school teacher. My
Mhm.
tita was in the corporate world. I have an aunt and an uncle who became community organizers and social workers. And so our view of martial law was actually very interesting. So my tita, who was a social worker, ended up working in the NHA, the National Housing Authority. And
Mhm.
she was assigned in Davao and in Ilocos, if I'm not mistaken. And she actually witnessed the way Imelda Marcos was treated like royalty. And she expected to be treated like royalty whenever she would visit her housing projects,
Mhm.
the different housing projects of the NHA. Whenever staff of the NHA would hear that Madame Imelda would visit that particular project, they would have what they call a tusok campaign. They would buy all of these cut flowers and then they would literally tusok it into the ground para magmukhang garden with flowers, para magmukhang
Wow.
instant landscaping. Kasi
Right.
she demanded that everywhere she went, kailangan maganda. And it
Hmm.
was not up to her standards, she would throw a tantrum and everyone would suffer. So parang they really saw themselves as royalty, as if they owned and ruled the Philippines. Yun yung
Mhm.
expectation. No?
And I guess it follows that everybody else were the subjects
Oh
that
yeah.
needed to please and
Oh yeah.
kowtow. All
Oo.
right. Thanks, Sandra. So, ikaw, Kuya Dan, I know that your dad was an editor-in-chief and he was already critical. Was there any escalation, though, during that time? And I think you explained earlier that when you received the information, you were 12 to 13 years old and it just didn't dawn on you quite yet. But then by the time you were a senior and editor in chief, you began to see perhaps the workings of this, the tentacles, how far they reached, even to your local, to your school paper. And so, were there any other things that happened that perhaps emphasized the changes that were going on at that time? And were there any other reactions from your family?
Well, I was too young, even in senior high school, to understand what was going on. I wasn't even aware. Hindi ko namamalayan ko na talaga yung nangyayari. Although nasa-sense ko na parang meron, pero parang kung meron man, hindi naman malala, yung ganun. Ito yung napansin namin sa family, na tuwing New Year's Eve, hindi magpapaputok yung mga tao kasi New Year's Eve celebration. Tapos, the next day, you will see, tatlo lang ang dyaryo nun na pinayagan ng gobyerno na maglabas ng balita. Bulletin Today, Daily Express, saka Times Journal. Uniform ang storya, isa lang yung banner story nila. New Year celebration peaceful, no firecrackers. Diyan pa lamang, alam mo na. Kasi the previous night, kaliwa kanan ng putukan ng ng firecracker. Tapos punong-puno ng upos ng firecracker yung kalye the next day. Tapos meron pang sunog na goma. Tapos ganun ang ulat ng dyaryo mo, alam mo na hindi ito nagsasabi ng totoo. Okay? Pero kung hindi yan totoo, anong totoo? So nagkaroon ng putukan ng firecrackers ng panahon na yan. Pero bukod pa doon, ano pang hindi totoo dyan? Hindi mo alam. Pero, okay, moving on from that, my father used to be writing about politics when he was still a student. Hindi na siya, kasi natapos rin niya yung degree niya in another school. He had to transfer to MLQ. Doon niya natapos. Tapos, nag-focus siya sa trabaho. He was an insurance adjuster. He became manager of the claims department. They investigate the claims of insurance company clients to see kung totoo. Kasi meron nandadaya dyan para lang makakolekta sa insurance. Tine-check niya yan. Trabaho niya yan. So, investigador siya. At one point, he held jobs in 3 companies. And there was even a time when he tried to set up his own company. Meaning, economically, okay naman kami. Hindi namin masyado nararamdaman yung hirap nung simula. We were your traditional middle-class family. Mommy was a housewife. Daddy was working. Yung mga lolo ko patay na, yung mga lola ko retired na. So, ganun lang. It was simple and placid. Puro ordinary family drama lang. Now, come 1978, binukas yung batasang pambansa to elections. So nagkaroon ng election ng 1978. Tumakbo yung opposition, naglabas sila ng bagong party, Lakas ng Bayan, and Ninoy Aquino headed that party. And even before I had watched Ninoy on TV, he had a program called Insights Channel 5. And I saw one episode where he discussed how Singapore was a model of development that we could emulate. So parang noon, even before martial law was declared, naiisip-isip na rin namin na tatakbong Pangulo ito. And we would have applauded that. That did not happen. I was sad to know that he got detained and that he was still behind bars. But itong campaign na ito ng 1978, they allowed him to talk on TV. They gave him 1 hour. And there was a panel there grilling him. Tatlo sila, si Ben Rodriguez, Bulletin Today Editor-in-Chief, si Ronnie Nathaniels na alam mo naman pro-Marcos na telecaster, saka si Juan Ponce Enrile. Si Juan Ponce Enrile nga yata, they interviewed him on TV. And he actually was able to put out the message that he wanted to say. He was able to overrule all 3. He was able to point out kung ano yung mga kailangan gawin. And
wow, okay.
78 yung election na yan. Nung pumapasok na yung mga election returns nung una, panalo ang Lakas ng Bayan. Pero the announcers kept telling us on TV na these are not the complete returns. So the next day, baliktad na yung story. Alam mo na nangyari.
All right. Wow. So tension was building. Yes, Tisandra.
Can I add lang? I'm glad you mentioned the newspapers that were allowed to operate during martial law kasi my mother was when I was a toddler, my mother was a reporter for Times Journal. And
Mm.
one of my memories as a child is that because she was busy working as a reporter, she would read storybooks during weekends and make tape recordings of her voice reading the storybook so that when she's out doing her job, we could still play her voice reading us storybooks even when she's not there. I mentioned my mother, my late mother, because I think, again, I realize now what an interesting family I was born into. No?
Mm.
My grandfather was working in the Manila Times. My mother was a reporter for the Times Journal. One thing I remember my lolo saying is that when we were younger, up until 1986, he would say things like whenever people in our family would talk about politics, they would say, not so loud. Rumor mongering is a crime. Baka mahuli kayo. So even chismis was a crime during martial law. You cannot talk about things just the way we talk about things right now. You had to control yourself even inside your house because baka isumbong ka ng kapitbahay. No? So I want to go back to my mom because I realized just how interesting and how my family pala was like in a very interesting position historically kasi after she left the Times Journal, my mother became an editor in the very first independent anti-Marcos newspaper, which is the Pahayagang Malaya, which was put up by Joe Burgos. So my mother eventually became an editor in the Malaya newspaper. And when I was in elementary school in the early 1980s, in the years towards People Power 1986, Mama would bring us to her office because our school was very near the office of Malaya, which was on West Avenue at that time. My school was Jasams, which was the very first non-traditional school in the country. And so after school, we would go to Mama's office and I would actually witness what it was like to put together an anti-Marcos newspaper. Because I remember seeing all of the political cartoons posted on the walls of the newsroom. I saw them like laying out the newspaper. I saw the sketches of the comics and the artists, no. So nakita ko na parang I remember one of the most popular political cartoons against Marcos. They called him Lupus Man, no,
Hmm?
because he had lupus at that time. So it was very important, I think, for them to show the weakness of the dictatorship, to point out the physical weakness of the dictator in order to help bring him down. So yun, na-realize ko bigla ngayon na parang, oo nga no, I did witness history happening in the newsroom in where my mother worked. No? Na parang ito yung pinakaunang dyaryo who actually bravely went against Marcos's censorship. No?
Wow.
May
That's
contact ako, no, about 1978. Nakalimutan kong banggitin to. I tried to vote. I was 18. I tried to vote.
uh,
I tried to vote. So I went to the precinct. Humarap sa akin yung barangay chairwoman. Ano siya,
uh,
dark skin, medyo a bit chubby and tibo siya halata from the way she's dressed, from the way her hair was tibo siya tapos tinanong niya sa akin, saan na student ID mo? Nilabas ko. Nakita niya, pagtingin niya, sabi niya, ay hindi ka pwedeng bumoto. Bawal bumoto ang UP student. Ha? Talaga?
mm,
Basta bawal bumoto ang UP student. That was the first and last time I tried to vote during the martial law years.
1978. Wow,
1970.
thanks for sharing. I realized that it seems like the stories that unfolded, these are the stories that we don't hear about because we hear about the big, insurgencies or the reasoning behind martial law. But these stories where we hear about even the curtailment of basic freedoms of the ordinary man. Normal families going through life under those years. It's very important that we're able to share that now. And so maybe just to tie it all in and bring it together for this evening, considering all of that, I know that this was just a snapshot perhaps of that time, a view of a few of your recollections, but considering all of that and taking every experience afterwards, can you just share a little bit how living through those years has influenced your life today? And I know that Ate Joy mentioned it earlier, and she said that at that time, because she was in UP, she was an activist, but also a young Christian. It had her confront the question of justice. And so, looking back decades later, can you share with us perhaps what that did to the trajectory of your lives, and has it influenced what you're doing now? Ate Joy, you can go ahead.
As I mentioned earlier, that really started my journey, no? So I keep on hearing be salt and light. So I keep on reflecting, where does transformation occur? Within the system? Outside the system? So I worked within the system for a while. I tried it. I understood, say, I worked for an assemblyman, a senator, and office of the president. I had those short stint, and it made me understand about the workings, even beyond the martial law, okay? The inner workings of the legislative process and then politics. And how did that influence me right now? For the past, say, 20 years of my ministry, I consider my work as a ministry, So I've been involved in advocacy work, fight against corruption, voter education, influencing government for environmental governance. So those experience from the inside made me more wise in how to create a strategy to influence a certain policy or to influence, say, government to integrate a creation care program. So that has been my life for the past years, for several decades. It is about, I have a deeper understanding of justice and how does justice look like when we talk of government and even for us as a people and even in the context of a church. So it was a long journey, a series of reflection. I had to grapple with it when nobody can help me answer. Although I tried all the readings, the books, maybe I can learn from the books, but then I think I just realized that, the Lord has a way of making all our experience roll into one, and He places you at a certain point in history that you can help, not just about building our nation, but it's really advancing the kingdom of God.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that insight. I really like how you said you tried to read about it, inform yourself, but it boils down to the fact that you had to grapple with it yourself through being in the arena. You were there, you were present, and you were figuring it out. And I think that is a message that we could all do to hear, especially for those who may have been disheartened by the previous year's election. So thank you, Ate Joy. Ate Sandra, how about you?
Well, I was raised during martial law by teachers, activists, lawyers, community organizers, social workers. I was raised by an extended family who believed that their faith overlapped with their activism. No? Um, I think two members of our family became missionaries towards the latter part of martial law precisely because they felt that they could do better work outside of government and instead do the work of the Lord. No? Because I was raised by activists and people who love books, and I was also raised upon a very rich diet, raised with a very rich diet of stories about the martial years and the years after. I find myself having no choice but to become a writer and a storyteller. And because these people who uh, told me stories about the early years of martial law are no longer here, I find that I have to continue the work that they started with me. No, they told me stories about martial law, and so I continue their work as a storyteller of martial law. I'm also professionally a teacher. No, I teach at the university, and whatever class I teach there, whether it's creative writing or literature, I always bring in not just martial law, but basically I ask my students to position themselves where they are with regards to um, current circumstances, no, politically and historically, no. Parang I always ask my students, kanino ka kakampi? With with the work that you are doing, whatever your major is, whatever it is that you choose to write, kanino ka kumakampi? And so I actually do go back to what I learned in Sunday school, diba? Which is, what Jesus told us, always side with the least among us. And so it's something that I learned from my extended family, no? Whatever field we are in, whatever occupation, we always work for justice, because when we work for justice, then we are doing the work of the Lord, no? Because our God is a God of justice.
Amen. I love that question. It's very simple to apply. You remove everything else and you can ask yourself in the work that you're doing, whatever it is, kanino ka kakampi? Simple lang. And I think in the story that you've shared, your family's decision, for example, to your dad or your grandfather's decision to say no to the invitations, and even if it meant having to bear the economic consequences of that, I think was a decision na kumampi sa tama. Kasi alam niya na meron pa ring exchange. There's a compromise that's going to happen somewhere along the road. And so praise God for that. And praise God for the work that you are doing too, because I remembered earlier when I introduced you, you're doing a dissertation on storytelling as embodied creative practice and acts of resistance. And I thought that, wow, this is a tool for remembrance and learning and resistance and inspiration, because it shows us that the story has not ended. It continues, and we need to be able to bring this forward every time. And so, thank you for sharing that, Ate Sandra. Kuya Dan, how about you?
Well, kasi nung una, 'di ba nilayo ako sa UP ng parents ko kasi ayaw nila ako maging artista. Pero pinayagan nila ako entrance exam diyan nung martial law na kasi tahimik na. So, tapos sikat ang UP. Kung graduate ka ng UP, ano ka? Uh, ikaw ang uunahin sa job placements. Kasi, UP ito, magaling ito. Ganon. So nakapasok ako ng UP at doon ko nalaman ng katotohanan. Mahabang kwento yan, yung drama niyan. Nasama ako sa isang protesta na akala ko walang mangyayari. Yung mga non-academic personnel ng UP, pinaglalaban yung wage increase noong 1979. At yun naman mga estudyante, isinama nila yung kanilang demand for the restoration of the student council. Sumama ako sa protesta noon, pero sinasabi ko sa organizer, alam niyo kung paano niyo ma-achieve yan? Magtayo kayo ng army. Kasi yun nila mapapao ang gobyerno dito. Nagulat ako. Pumayag si Marcos sa across the board wage increase. Bumigay siya sa demands ng mga non-academic personnel. Dahil sa puwersa ng mass action sa loob ng UP mismo. Tapos, late that year, yung UP President, Emmanuel Soriano, granted the students the right to set up their student council. Finally, after so many years from the declaration of martial law, hinayaan ng mga estudyante na itayo ang student council nila. Called it a Christmas gift. No, the students called it a Christmas prize kasi pinaglaban namin yan. Galit si Marcos doon. Pinatawag niya si Soriano, pinagalitan. Bakit mo binigay yung student council? Anyway, so yung panahon na yan, nasama ako sa rally tapos nagtagumpay kahit walang armas. Tapos niyaya ako actually I was a member of a student organization that had a cell group of the Kabataang Makabayan running it. And they invited me to a weekend educational seminar on the history of the Philippines. And they were feeding me material about what was happening, reports about what was happening in our political detention centers, how political prisoners were being treated, how the sacadas of Negros and their families were starving. The children were starving to death because of the landlord's refusal to allow the workers to plant for their own needs. The selfishness of the cronies of Marcos who were running the show in Negros. You know, stories like this. And I was told, sinabihan ako ng organizer, naipanalo natin to, walang army. Pero may army actually, gusto mo sumali. May army na.
Sumali ka pa, Kuya Dan.
No, I never joined the NPA. And I'm glad I did not go that far, although I was tempted to. I became an activist. I became a member of the Kabataang Makabayan. I became a student leader of student organizations. And we took up the Marcos government on a number of issues until the Ninoy Aquino assassination. I eventually gravitated away from the mainstream leftist organizations and ended up joining the more independent ones. And I gravitated away from activism during the EDSA years kasi parang may kulang sa, parang nakukulangan ako, parang there's something missing here. Parang there is the spiritual dimension of my life was missing. So that's a story for another time, but yung experience ko under martial law made me value yung the democracy or the freedoms we do exercise today. Ang hirap balik nun eh. Ang daming naparusahan, namatay, na-torture, para lang maibalik lahat yan. Ang hirap mawala uli niyan. Uulitin natin yung sakripisyo na yun. Sa karong tinatanong na ako, tutulong ka ba dito? Kasi alam mo maraming dapat gawin para ituwid ang mali. Tutulong ka ba sa amin? Alam ko na nagdesisyon ako na sumama dyan. Alam ko na tinataya ko ang buhay ko. That was not an easy decision to make. I was scared. On the other hand, nakukonsensya ako kasi naisip-isip ko. Let's just say that I ignored all of this and went on with my life. Ordinaryong tao lang, nag-graduate ka na, nagkaasawa, nagkaanak, nagtatrabaho. Ito ba ang ipapamana ko sa mga anak at apo ko? Klaseng lipunan na may diktadura, na diktadurang pumapatay at nagpapahirap sa bayan. Ito ba ang pamana ko sa kanila? Ano ang sasabihin ko sa kanila? Hindi ba nakakahiya yun? Itong sasabihin ko sa kanila, pasensya ka na kayo ito yung problema. Pero wala, hindi ko masolusyonan. Kayo nang bahala dyan. Parang hindi pwede. Hindi tama. Parang nakukonsensya ako. Hindi pwedeng ganunin ko ito. I had to make a decision. I had to do something. I could not turn my back on all of this. Something had to be stopped. And if it repeats today again, if it is still continuing in ways that we do not know about, we have to do something.
Right. And is this the reason why you became a journalist? Is this the reason why the trajectory of your life went to writing?
That was part of the reason. The other was that along the way, I found out na ito pala kaya kong gawin. Yun. Kaya kong gawin ito. Nagagawa ko ito. Nakapanalo nga ako ng isang award. Pero hindi lang yun yung dahilan. Siguro talagang dito ako dinala ng Diyos.
Yeah. Yeah. Praise God. And I know, Kuya Dan, we had a conversation about this, that you were one of those who felt frustrated by the previous elections. And yet, I see that the way that you also grappled with that and, made a decision was actually to come, well, first ask your pastor and then to come to ISAK. And now you are a resident writer here. And so I praise God for that as well. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to look at some questions here. We have maybe a couple of minutes to look at some questions. And for those that I don't get to read, trust that we will get back to you at a later time. But what I have here now is a question from Timothy Ngo. Anong tumatak sa inyo na word of God para sa active public resistance of evil? And how do you deal with the fear? Does anybody want to take that?
Sandali.
I remember earlier, Ate Sandra mentioned that she remembered that in the Bible we are taught to side with the least among us, and so that might be um, one verse we can remember. But if anybody else has a verse, before I share the verse that came to mind.
Matatuloy, no? Hindi nagme-memorize ng Bible verses.
I have another verse which I actually parang remembered from childhood, but I can't remember. I know it's from the book of Amos. Something
Mhm.
about let justice roll like
Like a river.
a river. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was actually something that I remember from childhood na parang our God is a God of justice. And he
Yeah.
wants justice to roll like a river. No?
Right.
So
Right.
when we as members of our churches make a political stance, we are actually following what God is telling us, making a stand against evil, being active. Kasi di ba parang activism has become such a bad word in
Mhm.
churches, no? Kasi lagi tayong sinasabihan, oy, Romans 13, di ba?
Mhm.
Obey your leaders lagi. Laging ganun yung sinasabi sa atin eh. Pero, di ba, we are given a chance to discern and to actually um, see how we can do the work of God. No, how can we resist evil? How can we um, continue to tell the truth? It's something that we have to really think about every single day with the decisions we make, as not just in our work, not just as citizens, but also as Christians. Di ba?
Right. Yeah.
Often kasi napaka-divided ng ano ng buhay natin, 'di ba?
Yes.
We think that we think that as Christians we just have to evangelize and pray ganyan, pero hindi we have to resist the evil that is around us.
Right. Right.
And I think
Unpleasant as it
the
may be.
is recognizing that there is evil in
Correct.
the halls of power at the moment.
Correct. So, perhaps we go to the second question. Maybe, Ate Joy, do you have any answers to how then do you deal with fear? If we are to resist evil.
Sa akin, I'll answer first yung first question.
Okay.
Sa akin, overcome evil with good.
Mm.
Kasi nasa romance din yan eh. Sa akin, mas lumalim yun, no? Kasi palagi nga, as Sandra mentioned, na palaging in-emphasize sa church, submit to government. Ang hindi naman na-emphasize dyan, limited authority lang naman ang binigay sa gobyerno. The absolute authority is with God. And if
Right.
you continue to, yung chapter 12 and chapter 14, it's really about the theme of overcoming evil with good. Whether
Yeah.
you're working in government, because I have seen people in government struggling with injustices in their own spheres, no?
Right.
So I wouldn't say that if you work with government, it's already evil. There are some people in government who struggle with their faith. They want to express their faith. They try to be people of integrity. As simple as, yung every 15-30 lang dumadating, sila pa ang napopromote. At tapos yung tinambak na trabaho dun sa tao, they work so hard, they go home late at 10 in the evening, tapos ganun na lang, no? Sila pa ang hindi na-promote. Those are injustice.
Yeah.
A form of injustice within. So, ang sa akin, overcome evil with good, ang basis ko is really God is the God of justice. And in the end, He will really, ako mas lumalim sa akin yung ano ngayon, and our God just scoffs kings. Pull down, God can raise leaders. Ganun ka-powerful yung sovereignty ng God. And He can use any one of us, whether we work outside government or inside government. Now, how did you deal with fear? In resisting evil? Sa akin naman, maliliit hindi yung fear of threat to life. Okay? Just the power of saying no. Sasabihin ng boss mo, start telling the lie na ganito, ganyan, ganyan. Una, ang hirap, but once you say no, because you believe you need to do what is right, then that paves way. When I worked with the senator, there was this Countryside Development Fund, PDAF ang tawag natin ngayon. I really took care of that fund, which was entrusted to me. Iniisa-isa ko pa yung municipality, consult what is the need of the community. Because that's my expression of what is justice. Justice is giving what is due to the people. Very clear, very ako dun sa marginalized sector. That's why I'm also into children and youth kasi may mga abuses, di ba, mga trafficking na mga issues ganyan. So I'm into that. Kaya ako, whether I'm in government or outside government, very clear ako, I serve the God of justice, and in any expressions that I can, yung pag-articulate ko doon, umiiba. So, wala akong na-experience na fear, no? In that sense. Kung experience lang. But I just, siguro yung sinabi nila sa akin, hindi ka ba natatakot yung sa advocacy mo on fight against corruption? Sabi ko, kung mauna ang fear, wala akong magagawa. Kasi paralysis lang. Ako, tatahak ako. I'll make a step of faith so that I just obey. So it's not fear that will lead me, but it's faith that will move me.
Right. Wow.
So I just keep on educating. Sa awa naman ng Diyos, wala namang threat to life sa akin nung Kasi ngayon, yung sinabi ni Sandra kanina na, martial law never really ended. In a sense, yung militarization talaga, the culture of yung power ng military. Andyan lang naman yan, torture regardless of the administration. So we need to educate people what democracy is really about. What is freedom really about? And yun yung sa akin na yung citizen education. I've always been there, even sa election. You educate people to value their freedom.
Right.
To fully understand what democracy is all about. Kasi kailangan natin palalimin yon sa mga tao. That's one track that the Lord has led me all these years, no? Hindi yung activism na talagang iba siya, iba. And that's okay. I think each one of us has a place.
Right.
You can do writing, you can I mobilize, no? Mobilize and do advocacy work. So, yun yung doon ako nilagay ng Panginoon. Pero yung fear na yan, sasabihin ko na lang, I will, I believe that God will take care of me. I will take a step of faith. Siya ang nauna. So faith ang nauna, hindi fear.
Yeah. Thank you, Ate Joy. And I think on that note, we can wrap up tonight's discussion. I know we could talk at more length, but also we're running a little bit over time. And so I'd just like to thank everyone for sharing, for remembering, for going back, and reaching back to those experiences that have led you to where you are today. And I know that not all those experiences have been good, but I praise God that we all believe in the God that works things out for the good. And so, on that note, thank you very much, Kuya Dan, Ate Sandra, and Ate Joy. I loved what you said. Timothy, it is not fear that will lead me, but faith that will move me. Thank you, Ate Joy. That was lovely. And for everyone else who's still listening, thank you for being with us tonight. After hearing all of these stories, I hope that we could reflect on similarities even of just the dynamics of what it was like, 3 decades ago, 4 decades ago, and how we are now. We are reeling from a very divisive election. We had a very divisive election, and we see the nitty gritty of relationships within families that don't agree on certain candidates, and even interests that interlock. We have families that work for government. We have families that work maybe alongside government or sometimes criticize government. And so we see how not much has changed, but perhaps what we would do well to understand is that that's not a call to be complacent. On the contrary, we should be more aware and cognizant. We need to know that we are called to live in this present, look at our context, and be able to be accountable for the decisions that we make. And so the question now is, what does it look like to do justice in a world that is unjust? If you are a believer in Christ, or whether you would like to become a good citizen, what does that mean in your life? What is the substance or expression of that desire? That may be the question we need to look at. And we have gotten great insights tonight about perhaps just asking the question, kanino ka kakampi? Diba? And in that decision, are you willing to face the consequences? That it might be difficult, and yet you are siding on the side of right. And so with that, thank you all again, and I hope that you would be able to tune in on February 16 as we continue this series for the month. On February 16, we're going to be talking about Kapit Lang, revisiting history and learnings on change making with Mary Reselis. And for those who would like to listen to our conversation tonight, and even the one from last January, you can go to Spotify and look for us. ISIP ISAK, Faith and Society Unplugged. We have our conversations there uploaded the following Thursday. And so you can wait for this talk next Thursday, or you can visit us on Facebook or on YouTube. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
for the stories.
Sandra.